The mining drills had been silent for 3 days when the sky began to crack. Ben Roberts felt the change first, his fingers pausing over the raised dots of his reading pad as vibrations traveled through the metal floor of their small apartment. Something was wrong with the air itself. It tasted different, like the moment before lightning strikes, but there were no storm clouds on Haven's Rest. The asteroid colony didn't have weather, just the steady hum of air recyclers and the distant rumble of mining equipment. "Dad?" Ben called out, turning his head toward the kitchen where his father was preparing their evening meal. "Do you feel that?" David Roberts looked up from the protein synthesizer, wiping his hands on his work clothes. "Feel what, son?" Before Ben could answer, every electronic device in their apartment began to flicker. The lights dimmed and brightened in rapid succession. The synthesizer made a grinding noise and shut down. Outside their window, similar problems spread across the colony like a wave. Ann Roberts rushed in from the medical center next door, her breathing quick and worried. "Something's happening in Sector 7. All our equipment just went crazy. Scanners are showing readings that don't make sense." David moved to the window, pressing his face against the reinforced glass. Haven's Rest stretched out before him, a collection of connected domes and tunnels carved into the largest asteroid in the system. Thousands of people lived here, mining rare metals from the surrounding rocks and sending them back to Earth. It was dangerous work, but it was home. "There," Ann pointed toward the mining sector. "Look at the sky above Platform 12. Ben couldn't see what his parents were staring at, but he could hear it, a sound like glass breaking but stretched out over several seconds. It made his teeth ache and sent shivers down his spine. "It's like the air is tearing apart," David whispered. A bright flash filled the room, so intense that Ben could sense it even through his darkness. His parents gasped, and he heard his mother take a step backward. "What is it?" Ben asked, standing up from his chair. "I don't know," his father said. "It's small, maybe the size of a cat, but it's glowing, and it's floating." Through the tear in space that had appeared above the mining platform, something had emerged. It moved like liquid light, its form shifting between solid and transparent. From a distance it looked beautiful, almost like a piece of living crystal, but every electronic device within a kilometer began to malfunction the moment it appeared. The creature seemed to look around, as if confused by its new surroundings. When it moved, the air around it shimmered like heat waves. Where it passed, metal surfaces began to corrode and plants withered. "We need to evacuate the sector," Ann said, reaching for her communication device. But when she tried to activate it, the screen showed only static. Across the colony, similar scenes played out. Security forces tried to reach the creature, but their vehicles stopped working when they got too close. Communications failed. Even simple mechanical devices began to jam and break down. The creature seemed drawn to movement and noise. When a group of miners ran from their platform, it followed them, floating effortlessly through the thin atmosphere. As it moved, it began to grow. Not quickly, but noticeably. By the time the miners reached safety, the creature was twice its original size. Colony Administrator Walsh tried to coordinate a response from the Central Command Center, but his efforts were hampered by the spreading equipment failures. Radio, communications worked only in short bursts. Computer systems crashed and restarted randomly. Even basic lighting flickered and failed. "What do we know about it?" Walsh asked his science team. Dr. Martinez, the colony's head researcher, shook her head. "Nothing makes sense. It appears to be partially phased out of normal space-time. Energy readings suggest it exists in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Can we contain it?" "We've tried. Force fields pass right through it. Physical barriers do nothing. It's as if the creature exists here and somewhere else at the same time." The situation worsened as the hours passed. The creature continued to grow, feeding on some unknown energy source. What had started as a cat-sized entity was now the size of a small vehicle. Worse, its presence was affecting the colony's life. Support systems, air recyclers struggled to function properly. Water purification systems began to fail. Ben spent the evening listening to the chaos outside their apartment. Emergency sirens wailed intermittently when they worked at all. He could hear people shouting, vehicles struggling to start, and underneath it all, something else. A sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Do you hear that?" he asked his parents as they huddled together in their living room. "Hear what?" Anne asked. "It sounds like singing, but sad, like someone crying for help." His parents exchanged worried looks. Ben's hearing had become incredibly sharp since losing his sight, and he often noticed sounds they missed. But this time, they heard nothing unusual. The creature had grown large, enough to be visible from anywhere in the colony by the time night cycle began. It moved slowly through the mining sector, its crystalline form casting strange shadows that seemed to move independently of any light source. Where it passed, the very structure of the asteroid seemed to weaken. Security Chief Thompson organized the evacuation of the worst affected areas, but the process was slow and difficult. Vehicles failed without warning. Communication systems worked sporadically. Even simple tools like flashlights and mechanical door openers began to malfunction in the creature's presence. "It's not attacking us directly," Thompson reported to Administrator Walsh, "but its mere presence is destroying our infrastructure. If it keeps growing, the entire colony will become uninhabitable." "How long do we have?" "At its current rate of growth, maybe a week before critical systems fail completely." By the end of the first day, the creature was the size of a small building. It had settled near the main mining platform, floating a few meters above the surface. Its form constantly shifted, sometimes appearing solid, sometimes transparent, sometimes seeming to exist in multiple places at once. The colony's children watched from safe distances, fascinated despite the danger. To them, the creature looked like a dragon made of light and crystal. The name stuck, and soon everyone was calling it the baby dragon. But Ben knew it wasn't a baby in any normal sense. When he listened carefully, focusing all his attention on the strange sound only he could hear, he detected something that made his chest tight with sympathy. The creature wasn't just growing and destroying their equipment by accident. It was lost, confused, and desperately trying to find its way home. He just had no idea how to tell anyone else what he was hearing, or how to help a being that existed partially outside their reality. All he knew was that the sad singing in his ears was getting stronger, and the baby dragon was running out of time to find its way back to where it belonged. The emergency broadcast reached Earth 3 days after the dragon appeared, carried by one of the few long-range communication arrays still functioning on Haven's Rest. Within hours, the message had spread throughout human space and beyond, intercepted by alien monitoring stations and translated into dozens of languages. Dr. Elena Vasquez stared at the data streams flowing across her screen in the Galactic Research Station orbiting Proxima Centauri. She had spent 20 years studying dimensional physics, but the readings from Haven's Rest defied everything she thought she knew about reality. "This is impossible," she muttered, running calculations for the third time. An entity that exists partially outside normal space-time, growing by feeding on ambient energy, immune to all known forms of containment. Her research partner, the Altarian scientist Kethra, shimmered with colors that indicated deep concern. The Altarians were beings of living crystal, masters of dimensional manipulation who had been traveling between realities for thousands of years. If anyone could understand the dragon, it should be them. "My people have faced similar entities before," Kethra said, his voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "But never one so unstable. The dimensional reading suggests it is from a reality where the fundamental laws of physics operate differently. Can you send it back? We will try. The Council of Dimensions is already preparing a fleet." The Altarian ships arrived at Haven's Rest within a week, sleek vessels that seemed to be made of pure light. They moved through space like thoughts through a mind, bending reality around them to achieve impossible speeds. Admiral Zethkar, leading the fleet, had personally banished 17-dimensional intrusions in his long career. The dragon had grown considerably during the week it took the Altarians to arrive. It was now larger than the colony's main administrative building, a writhing mass of crystal and energy that phased in and out of visibility. The mining operations had completely shut down, and half the colony's population had been evacuated to emergency shelters on distant asteroids. Ben Roberts remained with his family in their apartment, despite his parents urging to join the evacuation. He had become the colony's unofficial expert on the dragon's behavior, able to predict its movements by listening to the sad songs only he could hear. Administrator Walsh consulted with him daily, though she didn't really understand how a blind 12-year-old could know things their most sophisticated instruments couldn't detect. "It's getting more frightened," Ben reported during one of their meetings. "The singing is becoming more desperate. I think it knows something is coming." The Altarian assault began at dawn cycle, with Admiral Zeth Carr leading 3 of his most experienced dimensional engineers in a direct approach to the dragon. Their ships glowed with contained starlight, and the space around them rippled like water. Initiating reality anchor protocols, Zeth Carr announced. "We will lock the entity into our dimensional framework and force it back through the breach." The Altarians fired beams of pure dimensional energy at the dragon. The weapons were designed to grab hold of any creature existing across multiple realities and force it into a single-dimensional space. They had never failed before. This time was different. The dragon absorbed the energy beams like a sponge soaking up water. Instead of being contained, it began to grow faster than ever before. The crystalline entity that had been the size of a building became the size of a city block. Its form became more solid, more present in their reality. "Impossible," Admiral Zeth Carr broadcast. "Our weapons are feeding it." The dragon's presence began to affect the Altarian ships themselves. Their reality-bending technology went haywire, trapping them in localized time loops. 2 of the vessels began aging rapidly, their crystal hulls becoming brittle and cracked. The 3rd ship found itself stuck in a moment between 1 second and the next, its crew frozen in temporal amber. Zeth Carr's flagship barely escaped, limping away from Haven's Rest with its dimensional drives smoking and sparking. The proud admiral, who had never failed to solve a dimensional crisis, found himself facing something beyond his understanding. "The entity is not simply displaced," he reported to the Galactic Council. "It is incompatible with our reality at a fundamental level. Our attempts to force it into compliance only make it more unstable." The news of the Altarians' failure sent shockwaves through the galaxy. If the master dimensional manipulators couldn't handle the creature, what could? The answer came from an unexpected source. The hegemony of broken worlds, a coalition of warrior races that had spent centuries perfecting the art of destruction, volunteered to solve the problem with superior firepower. Fleet Commander Thane led the hegemony response, bringing 12 massive battlecruisers armed with planet-cracking weapons. The broken warriors who crewed these ships were veterans of 1,000 conflicts, their chitinous bodies scarred from countless battles. They had destroyed rogue planets, exterminated plague worlds, and crushed rebellions across 3 galaxies. Dimensional manipulation failed because it was too subtle, Commander Thane declared. "We will destroy the entity and the space around it. Sometimes the only solution is overwhelming force." Ben felt the change in the dragon's song the moment the hegemony fleet arrived. The sad, lonely melody became tinged with fear and anger. For the first time since it appeared, the creature began to move aggressively, its crystalline form lashing out at nearby structures. "It knows they mean to hurt it," Ben told Administrator Walsh. "It's getting ready to defend itself." "Can you calm it down?" "I don't think it can hear me the way I hear it. We're not really communicating. I'm just listening to its feelings." The hegemony attack was swift and brutal. 12 ships opened fire simultaneously, their weapons designed to tear holes in the fabric of space itself. Energy beams that could vaporize moons struck the dragon from all directions. The result was catastrophic, but not in the way anyone expected. The dragon didn't die or disappear. Instead, it absorbed every joule of energy the hegemony threw at it. It grew larger with each blast, its form becoming more solid and defined. By the time Commander Thane ordered his ships to cease fire, the dragon had become larger than their largest battlecruiser. Worse, the creature had begun to emit a low-frequency hum that penetrated the hegemony ship's armor. The sound drove the broken warriors into berserker rage, causing them to turn their weapons on each other. 3 ships were destroyed by friendly fire before Thane could withdraw his fleet beyond the dragon's influence. "It's some kind of psychic weapon," Thane reported, his voice shaking with uncharacteristic fear. The entity turned our own warriors against us. We have no defense against such an attack. The third attempt came from the Whisperers, beings of pure thought who existed as gossamer forms floating between dimensions. They approached the dragon not with weapons, but with an attempt to understand its mind. The lead Whisperer, an ancient entity known as Dream of Stars, extended his consciousness toward the dragon, trying to establish mental contact. What he found shattered his sanity within seconds. The dragon's mind existed across multiple dimensions simultaneously, thinking thoughts that followed no logical pattern. Its consciousness was like a maze with no center, full of concepts that had no equivalent in their reality. Dream of Stars recoiled in horror, his gossamer form flickering unstably. It thinks in colors that don't exist, he managed to communicate before his mind collapsed entirely. Concepts beyond understanding, not evil, just impossible. The failure of 3 different approaches to the dragon problem sent the Galactic Council into emergency session. Representatives from dozens of species gathered in virtual space, their forms ranging from crystalline humanoids to gas clouds with distributed intelligence. The entity continues to grow, reported Counselor Vex of the Chrome Collective, his mechanical form clicking and whirring. At current rates, it will be large enough to destabilize the entire star system within 2 weeks, and every attempt to stop it only makes it stronger, added Counselor Seer of Depths from the Deep Ocean Federation. Perhaps it is time to consider Protocol 7. Protocol 7, the systematic annihilation of any system containing an existential threat to galactic civilization. It had been used only twice in recorded history, both times to prevent universe-ending disasters. You're talking about killing millions of innocent humans, protested Ambassador Chen from the Terran Federation. Better millions than billions, Counselor Vex replied coldly. Or trillions if this entity destabilizes dimensional space on a galactic scale. The debate raged for hours, but the conclusion was inevitable. The dragon was beyond their ability to control or understand. Every species that had tried to help had only made the situation worse. The humans would be given time to evacuate, and then the entire system would be sterilized. On Haven's Rest, Ben continued to listen to the dragon's increasingly desperate song. He didn't know about the Galactic Council's decision, but he could feel the creature's growing panic. It was trapped in a reality that hurt it simply by existing, surrounded by beings who kept attacking it when all it wanted was to go home. It's just scared, he whispered to himself as he sat by his window, feeling the vibrations of the dragon's massive form moving through the colony. It doesn't mean to hurt anyone. It just wants to go home. But Ben had no way to help, and time was running out for everyone on Haven's Rest. The message arrived in the middle of Haven's Rest night cycle, transmitted through emergency channels by Ambassador Chen herself. Administrator Walsh's hands shook as she read the formal declaration from the Galactic Council. Humanity had 72 hours to evacuate Haven's Rest completely. After that deadline, the entire star system would be destroyed by antimatter bombardment. The Council's message was cold and clinical, but Walsh could read between the lines. They blamed humanity for the dragon's appearance. Humans were the newcomers to galactic civilization, the ones who pushed boundaries and took risks other species avoided. In the Council's view, this disaster proved that humanity was too dangerous to exist alongside the established order. They're going to kill everyone, Walsh whispered, staring at the communication screen. Not just the colony, the entire system. Dr. Martinez looked up from her sensor readings. The dragon is now over 3 kilometers long. It's destabilized local spacetime so severely that evacuation ships can't maintain stable orbits within 50,000 kilometers. How are we supposed to evacuate 40,000 people when transport ships can't even approach? The question hung in the air like poison. Admiral Harrison, commanding the hastily assembled human evacuation fleet, had discovered the same problem. His largest transport ship, capable of carrying 10,000 people, had attempted to reach Haven's Rest and suffered complete system failure at the edge of the dragon's influence. Time itself moved differently near the creature now, creating zones where minutes passed like hours and other areas where hours compressed into seconds. Ben Roberts felt the change in the dragon's song immediately. The creature's desperate melody had become chaotic, discordant. Where before it had sounded lost and lonely, now it sounded terrified. The dragon knew something terrible was approaching. "It's getting worse," Ben told his parents as they packed their few belongings. "The singing is breaking apart. I think it knows about the evacuation." David Roberts hefted their emergency kit, checking the oxygen canisters one more time. "How can it know it's just an animal?" "I don't think it is just an animal, Dad. It understands more than we think." The evacuation efforts began immediately, but progress was agonizingly slow. Ships that managed to reach the outer edge of the dragon's influence could only take on a few dozen passengers at a time before their systems began failing. Electromagnetic interference made communication nearly impossible. Navigation systems provided readings that changed from moment to moment as space-time warped around the creature. Captain Rodriguez commanded one of the smaller evacuation vessels, a former mining ship retrofitted with life support for 200 passengers. She had made 3 successful runs, ferrying colonists to the safety of distant ships, but each trip took longer as the dragon's influence expanded. "It's not just growing larger," Rodriguez reported to Admiral Harrison. "The distortion field is expanding faster than the creature itself. Pretty soon we won't be able to get within 100,000 kilometers. How many people do we still have on the surface?" 37,000. "At our current rate, we can maybe evacuate 5,000 more before the deadline." The math was brutal and inescapable. Even if every ship in the human fleet worked perfectly, even if the dragon stopped growing and interfering with their systems, they couldn't save everyone in time. The Galactic Council had given them an impossible task with an impossible deadline. Dr. Sarah Vance, working from the research ship Endeavour at the edge of the system, had been studying the dragon's behavior since the crisis began. Unlike the Yar alien scientists who had tried to force the creature into their understanding of physics, she approached it as a naturalist studying a new species. "It's not malicious," she reported during an emergency conference with the evacuation fleet commanders. "Every action it takes suggests an animal trying to return to its natural habitat. The dimensional phasing, the energy absorption, even the growth pattern all indicate a creature attempting to transition between realities." "Then why can't it just leave?" Admiral Harrison demanded. "We'd be happy to help it go home." "That's what I've been trying to figure out. The dimensional tear it came through sealed itself within hours of the creature's arrival, but something is preventing the dragon from opening a new pathway." Dr. Vance displayed her analysis on the conference screen. "Look at the energy patterns. Every time the dragon tries to phase out of our reality, something pulls it back. The effort creates an energy discharge that makes it grow larger and more unstable. What's holding it here? I think it's the dragon itself. It's caught in a feedback loop. Fear makes it try harder to escape. The harder it tries, the more energy it discharges. The more energy it discharges, the more it destabilizes local spacetime, which makes it harder to escape. It's trapped in a prison of its own panic." The revelation changed everything and nothing. Understanding the dragon's predicament didn't solve the evacuation crisis. If anything, it made the situation more tragic. The creature wasn't a monster or an invader. It was just a lost child, frightened and homesick, making everything worse by struggling against its situation. "So how do we break the cycle?" Admiral Harrison asked. "Someone needs to calm it down. Make it stop struggling long enough for the dimensional barriers to stabilize. Then it might be able to phase home naturally." "How do you calm down something that drives people insane just by being near it?" Dr. Vance had no answer. On Havens, rest? The evacuation proceeded in chaotic waves. Families were separated as ships filled to capacity and departed immediately. Essential personnel stayed behind to maintain life support and coordinate the rescue efforts, knowing they might be condemning themselves to death. The Roberts family was scheduled for evacuation on the final day, but their transport never arrived. The ship assigned to their sector suffered complete engine failure while attempting to approach the colony, leaving hundreds of families stranded. "We're not going to make it out, are we?" Ann Roberts asked her husband as they watched the evacuation ship struggle in the distance. David put his arm around her shoulders, looking out at the dragon that now dominated their sky. The creature's form shifted constantly between dimensions, sometimes appearing solid as stone, sometimes transparent as glass. Its presence filled half the horizon, a living testament to humanity's inability to control the forces they had unleashed. Maybe, not all of us, he said quietly, but Ben might have a chance. Their son sat nearby, his head tilted in that familiar listening pose. The dragon's song had become so chaotic that even his enhanced hearing struggled to make sense of it, but underneath the discord, he could still detect the creature's fundamental emotions: terror, loneliness, and an overwhelming desire to return home. "I wish I could help it," Ben said suddenly. "It's so scared and alone. Just like I was after the accident." His parents looked at him with a mixture of pride and heartbreak. Even facing his own death, their son felt sympathy for the creature that had doomed them all. The final evacuation ships departed Haven's Rest 18 hours before the Galactic Council's deadline, carrying the last group of people who could be safely rescued. 31,000 colonists remained on the surface along with the dragon that had become larger than their largest buildings. Admiral Harrison made one last desperate appeal to the Council, begging for more time or suggesting alternative solutions. The response was swift and final. Any delay risked the creature growing large enough to threaten neighboring star systems. The antimatter bombardment would proceed as scheduled. In the hours before the end, something unexpected happened. Dr. Vance detected a change in the dragon's energy signature, a subtle shift that her instruments almost missed. "The creature is calming down," she reported to the evacuation fleet. "I don't understand why, but its panic responses are decreasing." On Haven's Rest, Ben Roberts had stopped trying to interpret the dragon's chaotic song. Instead, he simply sat with his family and listened with compassion. He didn't try to understand or analyze what he heard. He just acknowledged the creature's pain and loneliness, offering the same quiet presence his parents had given him during his darkest days, after losing his sight. The dragon's song began to change, becoming less frantic and more focused. For the first time since its arrival, the creature stopped growing. The reality distortions around it began to stabilize, but it was too late. The Council's fleet was already in position, their antimatter weapons charging for the final bombardment. In 12 hours, everything within a light hour of Haven's Rest would be reduced to cosmic dust. Ben continued to sit with the dragon's song, offering the only thing he could: the patient understanding of someone who knew what it meant to be lost and afraid in an alien world. He had no way of knowing that his simple act of compassion was about to change the course of galactic history. The countdown clock in Admiral Harrison's command center showed 8 hours and 17 minutes until the antimatter bombardment would begin. Around him, his staff worked frantically to coordinate the final evacuation efforts, but everyone knew the truth. 31,000 people would die when the Council's weapons fired, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. Dr. Sarah Vance hadn't slept in 3 days. Her research station buzzed with activity as she analyzed every scrap of data about the dragon, searching for some solution that had escaped the galaxy's greatest minds. The creature had stabilized somewhat in the past few hours, but it was still far too large and dangerous for the Council to spare the system. "There has to be something," she muttered, running her hands through her disheveled hair. "Some way to communicate with it, to make it understand." Her assistant, Dr. Kim, looked up from his own screens. The Whisperers tried direct mental contact, and it destroyed their sanity. The Altarians attempted dimensional communication and failed completely. "How do you talk to something that exists partially outside our reality?" "Maybe we're thinking about this wrong," Vance said slowly. "We keep trying to impose our methods of communication on it. What if the dragon is already trying to communicate, but we can't hear it?" On Haven's Rest, Ben Roberts sat by his bedroom window. His unseeing eyes pointed toward the massive form that dominated the colony's sky. The dragon had settled into a more stable position, floating roughly a kilometer above the main mining platform. Its crystalline body still shifted between dimensions, but the chaotic energy discharges had decreased significantly. The change in the creature's song was remarkable. What had been pure chaos and terror for weeks was slowly resolving into something almost musical. Ben could detect patterns now, recurring themes that reminded him of whale songs or bird calls. It was still alien, still impossible to fully understand, but there was definitely intelligence behind it. "Mom, Dad," Ben called out. "I need to tell someone about what I'm hearing." David and Ann Roberts had spent the morning saying goodbye to their neighbors and friends. With less than 8 hours left, there was nothing to do but wait. They found their son sitting calmly by the window, his head tilted in that familiar listening position. "What is it, Ben?" Ann asked, settling beside him. "The dragon isn't just making noise, it's trying to talk. The sounds have patterns like language, but not any language we know. It's trying to tell us something." David frowned. "Son, we've had experts from across the galaxy study this creature. If it was trying to communicate, they would have detected. But they were looking for their kind of communication," Ben insisted. "Radio waves, telepathy, dimensional signals. What if the dragon communicates through something else? What if it uses emotions and feelings instead of words?" His parents exchanged glances. Ben's enhanced hearing had been remarkably accurate throughout the crisis, predicting the dragon's movements and behavior when their instruments failed. But this seemed like a desperate hope rather than a real solution. "Even if you're right," Anne said gently, "how could we prove it? And what could we do with that information?" Before Ben could answer, his father's emergency communicator crackled to life. Administrator Walsh's voice came through clearly for the first time in days, the dragon's interference finally weak enough to allow normal radio communication. "This is Colony Control calling all remaining personnel. Dr. Sarah Vance from the research vessel Endeavour is requesting immediate contact with Ben Roberts. Please respond if you're receiving this message." David activated the communicator. "This is David Roberts. My son Ben is here. What does Dr. Vance need?" Within minutes, they had established a direct communication link with the research ship. Dr. Vance's tired face appeared on the small screen, her eyes bright with desperate hope. "Ben, I need you to tell me exactly what you've been hearing from the dragon. Don't leave out any details, no matter how strange they seem." Ben described the evolution of the dragon's song, from the initial chaos to the current almost musical patterns. He explained how the sounds seemed to carry emotions along with them, creating a kind of communication that bypassed normal language entirely. "It's like when you hear someone crying," Ben said. "You don't need to understand their words to know they're sad. The dragon's song is like that, but much more complex. It's trying to share its feelings and thoughts through pure emotion." "Doctor," Vance leaned forward, her excitement growing. "Ben, this is incredibly important. Can you tell what the dragon is feeling right now?" Ben concentrated, focusing all his attention on the sounds only he seemed able to interpret. "It's still scared but not panicked anymore. There's loneliness, like it misses its family, and frustration, like when you know what you want to say, but can't find the right words." "What about its physical state? Is it in pain?" "Yes, but not the way we feel pain. It's like the dragon is allergic to our reality. Being here hurts it, but it can't leave. Every time it tries to go home, something pulls it back." Dr. Vance's screens filled with new data as she cross-referenced Ben's observations with her instruments. "The feedback loop," she whispered. "Ben, I think you've identified the key to solving this crisis." She explained her theory to the Roberts, family and Administrator Walsh, who had joined the conversation. The dragon was trapped by its own fear response. Every time it became frightened or agitated, it released energy that destabilized the dimensional barriers preventing its escape. This created more fear, more energy discharge, and a cycle that kept it imprisoned in their reality. "So we need to calm it down," Walsh said. "But how? Every attempt to approach the creature has failed." "Maybe we don't need to approach it, Doctor," Vance said, looking directly at Ben through the communication screen. "Ben, you said the dragon is trying to communicate through emotion. Do you think it can sense your emotions in return?" Ben considered the question carefully. Over the past few days, he had noticed that the dragon's song sometimes seemed to respond to his mood. When he felt particularly sad about their situation, the creature's melody became more mournful. When he tried to send feelings of comfort toward it, the chaos in its song decreased slightly. "I think it can," Ben said slowly. Not perfectly, but there's definitely some kind of connection. Dr. Vance's excitement was infectious, spreading to everyone listening to the conversation. Ben, this could be the breakthrough we need. If you can establish emotional communication with the dragon, you might be able to help it understand that it's safe to stop struggling. But I'm stuck here on the colony, Ben pointed out. The dragon is huge now. Even if I could talk to it, would it be able to hear me from this distance? Actually, your distance might be an advantage, Dr. Vance said. Every attempt to approach the dragon closely has resulted in system failures and panic responses. You're far enough away to maintain stable communication, but close enough for the emotional connection to work. Administrator Walsh checked her chronometer. We have less than 7 hours until the bombardment begins. Even if Ben can communicate with the dragon, how do we know it will help? We don't, Dr. Vance admitted, but it's the only plan we have that doesn't involve fighting the creature or trying to force it to do something against its nature. Ben felt the weight of 31,000 lives settling on his shoulders. Everyone on Haven's Rest, including his parents, was counting on him to somehow convince an alien entity to overcome its instinctual fear response and trust that it would be safe to stop defending itself. I'll try, he said quietly. But I don't know how to explain things to something that doesn't think like we do. You don't need to explain, Dr. Vance said. You just need to share what you're feeling. Show the dragon that you understand its loneliness and fear. Let it know that someone cares about its pain. Ben nodded, closing his eyes and focusing on the dragon's song. It had become clearer during their conversation, as if the creature sensed that someone was finally trying to listen. The melody was still alien and impossible to fully comprehend, but Ben could feel the emotions behind it more clearly than ever. Fear, loneliness, confusion, homesickness, and underneath it all, a desperate hope that someone, somewhere, understood what it was going through. Ben took a deep breath and began to project his own emotions toward the dragon, sending feelings of sympathy, understanding, and compassion across the space between them. He didn't know if it would work, but for the first time since the crisis began, he felt like he was actually trying to help, rather than simply observing from the sidelines. The dragon's song began to change immediately, its chaotic elements resolving into something that almost resembled a conversation. Ben smiled, realizing that he was finally talking to the creature that had accidentally doomed them all. The stolen shuttle Mercy's engines coughed and sputtered as it approached the dragon's reality distortion field. Pete Morrison, the old mining pilot who had agreed to Ben's desperate plan, watched his instruments flicker and die one by one. Kid, you sure about this? Pete asked, his weathered hands gripping the control stick. Once we get much closer, I won't be able to turn back. The engines will fail completely. Ben Roberts sat calmly in the passenger seat, his unseeing eyes focused on something only he could perceive. I'm sure the dragon is expecting us. Its song changed when we launched. They had left Haven's Rest without permission, slipping away while Ben's parents were coordinating with the evacuation efforts. Administrator Walsh had forbidden any approach to the dragon, but Ben knew there wasn't time for proper authorization. The Galactic Council's antimatter bombardment would begin in 3 hours, and someone needed to be close enough to establish real communication with the trapped creature. The dragon filled their viewport now, a massive entity of shifting crystal and energy that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. It was beautiful and terrifying, its form constantly flowing between solid matter and pure light. Where it moved, space itself rippled like water. Sweet mother of stars, Pete whispered. I've been mining these rocks for 30 years, but I've never seen anything like this. Ben could hear the dragon's song more clearly than ever before. The melody was complex, beyond human understanding, but the emotions behind it were becoming clearer with each passing moment. Fear dominated everything, but underneath it, Ben detected curiosity about their approach. The dragon knew they were coming, and it was trying to decide whether they represented another threat or something different. It's just scared, Ben said, softly. All this time, everyone's been trying to fight it or control it, but it's just a frightened child trying to get home. The shuttle's engines died completely as they entered the heart of the dragon's influence. Around them, reality became fluid. The stars outside shifted colors and positions. Time moved differently in different parts of the cockpit. Pete's hair turned gray and then black again as temporal waves washed over them. "This is it," Pete said, his voice strangely calm despite the impossible things happening around them. "We're drifting on momentum now. Whatever you're going to do, kid, you better do it fast." Ben unbuckled his safety harness and moved closer to the viewport. The dragon's song was overwhelming now, layer upon layer of alien emotion and thought, crashing over him like ocean waves. But he forced himself to listen beneath the chaos, searching for the core of what the creature was trying to communicate. Through the shuttle's failing communication system, Dr. Vance's voice crackled with static. "Ben, we're reading massive changes in the dragon's energy signature. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." "I'm not doing anything yet," Ben replied. "I'm just listening." The dragon's massive form began to shift, orienting itself toward their tiny shuttle. For a moment, Ben felt a flash of terror as the creature's attention focused on them directly. The emotional impact was like standing in a hurricane of pure feeling. But then, through all the alien chaos, Ben heard something familiar. Loneliness. The same desperate isolation he had felt after losing his sight, when the world became a strange and frightening place where nothing made sense anymore. The dragon was lost in a reality that hurt it simply by existing, surrounded by creatures who kept attacking it when all it wanted was to return to the safety of home. Ben began to project his own emotions toward the dragon, just as Dr. Vance had suggested. But instead of trying to explain complex concepts or communicate specific information, he focused on the simplest and most powerful feeling he could offer: understanding. He remembered the months after his accident, when everything familiar had been taken away and replaced with darkness and confusion. He remembered the fear of never belonging anywhere again, of being trapped forever in a world that seemed hostile and alien. And he shared these memories with the dragon, not through words or images, but through pure emotional resonance. The dragon's song began to change immediately. The chaotic discord that had dominated its melody for weeks started to resolve into clearer patterns. Ben could feel the creature's surprise as it realized that someone finally understood what it was experiencing. "That's it." Dr. Vance's voice came through more clearly as the dragon's interference decreased. "The energy patterns are stabilizing. Ben, you're actually getting through to it." But Ben barely heard her. He was lost in the dragon's song now, experiencing fragments of its memories and emotions. He saw glimpses of the creature's home dimension, a place where physics worked differently, and beings of living energy danced between realities as easily as birds flew through air. He felt the dragon's joy in that place, its sense of belonging and safety, and he understood with crystal clarity exactly what the dragon needed to hear. Ben leaned forward, pressing his hands against the viewport that separated him from the vast entity outside. The dragon's massive form had moved closer, its crystalline surface just meters away from their shuttle. Through the transparent metal, Ben could see patterns of light flowing through the creature's body like liquid starlight. He opened his mouth and spoke a single word, putting all his compassion and understanding behind it: home. The effect was instantaneous and profound. The dragon's chaotic energy patterns suddenly synchronized, like an orchestra finding its rhythm after hours of discord. The reality distortions around them began to stabilize. For the first time since its arrival, the dragon stopped growing larger. Ben felt the creature's massive consciousness focus on him with laser intensity. Through dimensions beyond normal perception, he sensed the dragon examining the concept he had shared, turning it over like a precious gem. "Home," Ben repeated, this time projecting not just the word but everything it meant to him. The safety of his parents' love, the comfort of familiar surroundings, the peace that came from being where you belonged. The dragon's response was like a symphony of pure joy. Its song transformed from chaotic noise to something that sounded almost like laughter, if laughter could exist across multiple dimensions simultaneously. The creature began to shrink for the first time since its arrival, its form becoming more translucent as it prepared to phase back to its own reality. Through the shuttle's communication system, they could hear cheering from the evacuation ships. Dr. Vance's voice was barely recognizable through her tears of relief. "The dimensional barriers are healing," she reported. The dragon is actually going home. But the process wasn't complete. The creature had stabilized and begun to return to its own dimension, but something was still holding it back. Ben could hear the strain in its song as it fought against whatever was anchoring it to their reality. Home, Ben said again, pouring every ounce of his determination into the word. He thought of his own journey from the darkness of his accident to the acceptance he had found with his family's help. He projected the feeling of someone reaching out to guide you safely through unfamiliar territory. The dragon responded by shrinking faster, its massive form compressing as more of its essence shifted back to its home dimension. The space around them began to return to normal as the creature's influence decreased. Home, Ben whispered one final time, adding a new element to his projection. Gratitude. Thank you for visiting, he tried to communicate. Thank you for letting us help. Now go where you'll be safe and happy. The dragon's song reached a crescendo of pure happiness, a sound like wind chimes made of starlight. Its crystalline form became completely transparent, existing more in its home dimension than in theirs. And then, with a sound like cosmic wind, it phased out of their reality entirely. The dimensional rift that had brought the creature to their universe sealed itself with a gentle pulse of energy, leaving only normal space where impossible forces had once raged. The stars returned to their proper colors and positions. Time flowed normally again. In the silence that followed, Ben could hear Pete crying quietly in the pilot's seat. Through their communication system came the voices of 31,000 people who had been saved by a blind boy's ability to offer compassion to something that seemed beyond understanding. Ben, Dr. Vance's voice was soft with wonder. The Galactic Council is calling off the bombardment. You did it, you actually did it. But Ben barely heard the celebration. He was thinking about the dragon's song, and how it had sounded so much like his own voice during the darkest days after his accident. Everyone deserved to have someone who understood their pain, who could help them find their way home when they were lost and afraid. The shuttle Mercy drifted peacefully through normal space, its engines slowly coming back online as the last effects of the dragon's presence faded away. Pete wiped his eyes and began plotting a course back to Haven's Rest, where Ben's parents were probably worried sick about their missing son. You know what the strangest part is? Pete said as they began their journey home. What's that? I think that dragon was just a baby. Can you imagine what the adults are like? Ben smiled, settling back in his seat. Somewhere across the dimensional barriers, a young creature was reuniting with its family after being lost in a strange and frightening place. The thought made him happy in a way that had nothing to do with saving 31,000 human lives. Sometimes the most important thing you could do was simply let someone know they weren't alone, that someone understood their fear and wanted to help them find their way home. It didn't matter if that someone was human or alien, sighted or blind, large or small. All that mattered was the willingness to listen with compassion and offer help when it was needed most. The evacuation fleet began its return journey to Haven's Rest, and across the galaxy, the story spread of how humanity had faced an impossible crisis, not with bigger weapons or superior technology, but with the simple gift of empathy offered by a blind child to a lost creature from another dimension. In the years that followed, when other species asked what made humans unique among the galaxy's civilizations, they would remember the day a 12-year-old boy spoke one word and changed the course of history. And they would understand, perhaps, for the first time, that humanity's greatest strength had never been their ability to fight or conquer, but their capacity to recognize pain in others and offer comfort when it was needed most.